Dawn over Groom-Dry Lake comes hard and colorless, a flat light that makes metal look colder than it is. The convoy eased off the dirt road with its headlights dead, tires cracking on crusted salt. In the cab of the lead truck, a civilian driver watched the horizon for the security jeep he knew would appear. It did, sliding in from the north, a gloved hand giving a small circle with the thumb and forefinger. He put the truck in park and waited for the gate to yaw open toward the fenced-off flats. No one said the word Area 51 out loud. They called it the site or the lake. The work order read the same every week. Barrels from the hangars, barrels from the shops, barrels taken out at night when the air was still. The driver backed to the trench under the eye of the guard, and two men in Tyvek suits, whose sleeves were taped at the wrists. The drums clanged as they were slid to the lip and tilted. Solvent smell rose first, then something sweet and sharp that made the driver's tongue go numb. He caught himself taking a short breath he couldn't finish and stepped back from the rim, eyes watering despite the wind. By the time the sun cleared Tickaboo Peak, the crews were gone, and a white haze hugged the ground. The driver coughed once, then again, and chalked it up to dust. That night, he noticed the backs of his hands had reddened where his gloves didn't meet his sleeves. He woke at 2 with his eyes burning and a taste like pennies. He told himself he'd ask to be reassigned, then took the next trip anyway. For years, the pattern held. Barrels were trucked from work bays where secret aircraft were skinned and fueled, from paint booths and wash racks, from tanks marked with names no one wrote down. When the burn didn't take, quicklime was shoveled into the pits. When it did, the wind carried the smoke toward the low lights of the support trailers. Mechanics joked that the stink kept coyotes away. Others started wearing bandanas. One man developed a rash under his wedding ring. Another kept a rescue inhaler in his pocket, even on good days. In the early 1990s, a few of the workers finally compared notes. They had more than rashes now. There were lesions that wouldn't close, lungs that whistled on stairs, nights slept in chairs because lying flat made breathing harder. Wives kept journals. One man died, and his widow, going through his locker, found photos of drums stacked 3 high and tagged for night disposal. A lawyer in Las Vegas agreed to meet them, and in a cramped office with the blinds closed, they laid out what they remembered. Open pit burns, drums cracking as the heat took them, smoke lying low and moving with the breeze. The lawsuit they filed did not ask for aircraft secrets. It asked what, precisely, had been in those barrels and pits so doctors could treat the damage. The government's answer was not an answer. The wastes, if any, were classified. Disclosing them would harm national security. The judge, bound by law, dismissed the case under the state secrets privilege. The workers and widows walked out of the courthouse with nothing proven and nothing disproven, only their bodies, which still hurt. The driver's wife pressed the dismissal order into a plastic sleeve and kept it in the kitchen drawer with birth certificates and a mortgage paper. The driver saw specialists. One treated his skin with ointments meant for radiation burns and wrote, "Contact dermatitis, unknown etiology." Another listened to his lungs and tapped a line on a chart labeled reactive airway disease, then shrugged. Without a list of chemicals, the doctor said, any connection would be guesswork. The driver brought a photocopy of the court order to each appointment anyway. The desert offered its own reminders. South along US 95 near Beatty, a dump that had taken low-level radioactive and hazardous waste for decades, erupted after heavy rains one October morning in 2015. Witnesses watched drums launch from their trenches and a pale plume drift over the highway. Investigators later pointed to a reaction between rainwater and buried sodium as the spark and documented the site's troubled history. The driver stared at the news footage and felt the old metal taste gather at the back of his tongue. Not all barrels were hidden by fences. The summer of 2016, a shaky video went viral showing men in work clothes tipping liquid from a blue drum onto bare ground behind a chain-link fence. Commenters demanded arrests. Regulators swabbed soil and later said they found no risky chemicals at that spot. But the image stuck. A barrel, a desert, and a decision made because it was fast. The driver kept seeing former co-workers at funerals and in clinics. Some set up fundraisers that bloomed and then closed. Others refused to talk, fearing that sharing details would break non-disclosure agreements they had signed to keep their jobs. A few found doctors willing to write what they suspected: chronic exposure to burning solvents, resins, and heavy metal dust. Without a material list, the conclusions could be only provisional. The driver began to carry a pocket notebook where he wrote the nights he had worked, the wind direction, the way his chest felt the next morning. On a winter morning years later, he drove out toward the boundary and parked where the public road bends around posted land. He watched contrails spread into veils and thought about the nights he had seen aircraft lift without running lights, black triangles swallowing the stars. He wasn't angry with the pilots or the engineers. He was angry at the quiet way the burns had been folded into the job, as if the desert could be trusted to bury anything. He had learned the desert doesn't bury, it stores. Wind doesn't make waste disappear. It only decides whose doorstep it lands on. He got back into his truck and opened a folder he kept under the seat. Inside were copies of the motions, the order dismissing the case, and clippings about the Beatty fire and the viral barrel video. None of it named what had been in the drums he had tipped. None of it told a doctor what to treat. The folder was proof of a shape without a face, events that happened, smoke that burned in the throat, symptoms that lingered after the wind died. That afternoon, a dust devil spun across the dry lake bed and unstitched itself against the far hills. The driver thought about the men in taped suits and the foreman with the clipboard, about heat rolling up from the trench, about the white smear that sat over the trailers like fog. He wondered whether the barrels had really kept coyotes away, or whether the animals were simply smarter about wind than men were. He started the truck and turned back toward the highway. The story of the toxic barrels in the Nevada desert is, on paper, unresolved. The substances remain unnamed. The pits, if they're there, are off limits. What remains are the bodies of the people who worked those night shifts, the photos in widows' drawers, and the memory of smoke that tasted metallic on the tongue and left a film over the teeth. The driver tells the story now without heat. He goes from step to step, the same way he did on those nights. Park, brake, tailgate, tilt, woomph, then wait for the wind to decide where the smoke would go. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. Subscribe for more true stories, if you dare.